Hey, so today's video is going to be a little bit long, just because it's on a topic that I just have a lot to say about. It's about spiritual awakening. Now, these are just my thought process, what I think it is, and I think it's very important to talk about. Certainly, I'm going to maybe sound like I'm off in the deep end somewhere. Again, that's not kind of where I'm wanting to go. I just kind of want to explain how I actually see it. Right off the bat, one of the things that kind of brings me to feeling that spiritual awakening is very important is ever since I was a kid, I've always had a belief that religion and science are both right. Certainly science, I believe, explains the how of things, and religion explains the why of things. And I've always felt that there's something in between, like a bridge of some sort, some missing information that we need in order to have them, fit together. And I do think spiritual awakening is possibly that link. Also, another reason why I want to address this is because I just find that it seems very trendy. People are definitely just kind of going into it for the wrong reasons, or not very, or just reasons that are not strong enough, I would say, maybe. So the first thing I just want to say about it is, of course, that, spiritual enlightenment or spiritual awakening is not what people think it is. Not at all. Certainly enlightenment, people have this idea of, you do these practices, you get this, this, I don't know, angel choir thing going on with enlightenment, and you're given this wisdom, and you're better than other people, and then you're just super blissful and you love everybody, but not necessarily. I think it's very serious business, and you have to walk into it for the right reasons. There's no one path. Every religious or spiritual group has references and steps to awakening. What I'm talking about is, a lot of times you'll hear spiritual awakening normally with like Kundalini yoga, but in Islamic culture, the whirling dervishes, they get enlightenment that way. Certainly in Buddhism, the monks get their enlightenment. So, there's no one real path. Every religious and spiritual group on this planet, when it comes to this, is very, very similar. Okay? So one thing I always like to think of it, or my idea of what spiritual awakening actually is it's basically, it's a path to wholeness. And what I mean by that is certainly having to, face unconscious fears that you have, which is huge. Think about the conscious ones you have. Those are pretty scary. And then to think that there's these other fears that you're not even aware of, that certainly, kind of guide you in your day to day, and you have to face those. Also, you have to face the darkest parts of yourselves. We always think that we're good people, and we always do positive things, and we've got to realize, no, there are very evil parts of ourselves, and we have to look at them, and we have to accept them. Spiritual awakening, this path to wholeness, heals, I would say, our deepest wounds. I also think of spiritual awakening as human evolution. It's just not fully understood or studied, really. One of the things I find interesting with spiritual awakening is the people that tend to have the experience. When they share their experiences, you'll notice that almost all of them, there's one or two things maybe are a little different, but for the most part, I would say at least 90% of the experiences are almost the same. And what really gets me even more is when you are talking with someone that has the experience and they've had no prior knowledge, meaning they don't meditate, they don't do yoga, they don't do spiritual practices that would have a spiritual awakening happen, and yet it happens to them. And they also report very similar experiences to those that actually are on that spiritual awakening path. So, I mean, right there just tells me, there's something bigger going on here. I think that spiritual awakening is a definite biological process, and it's one that I have a feeling that we're supposed to go through. I mean, all of us. But we have to just know, be in the right frame of mind, but also know what it is that we're needing to do. I also believe that it activates the body and the mind into like maturation. And it uses resources more efficiently. Spiritual, give you an example of that is, when you have a spiritual awakening, it definitely, when you're going through your unconscious fears and dealing with the darkest parts of yourself, I mean, it basically is putting, things where they should be, I guess, I don't know how to explain it exactly. I mean, one thing I can say is, maybe when a spiritual awakening happens, they say we only use 10% of our brain. And maybe when a spiritual awakening happens, we use, 15%. Or not even that high, maybe 11%. But we're using a level of our brain that we don't normally use. So our experiences of it, definitely are different than our definitely day to day things that we've always been comfortable with in perceiving reality. Also, our experiences can be different. Some people may experience spiritual awakening with a lot of ease, some blissfulness and love, and they just kind of walk into it easier. And which is amazing, because these are the people that can definitely be teachers and help other people that are going through the same thing, while others may experience just a complete nightmare. And with that, I mean, not to say these people can't be teachers as well, but they, have to go through a lot more to get to, there's the spiritual awakening that they're where they should be with the spiritual awakening. So sometimes, the teaching aspect would be a little different. I mean, I think I'm not sure, but it would just be different. That's all I can say about that, actually. But anyway, so, sometimes I think the reason spiritual awakenings happen is some people actually absolutely need it. And what I mean by needing it, and it's not just like I said, the enlightenment aspect. Sometimes it's for the brain and the body to be in sync and be at the maturity that you need to be at. And sometimes people have to have this spiritual awakening to actually leapfrog into the maturity that they should have. But the reason they are not there is maybe they had some things happen that were extremely traumatic. Something traumatic happened that prevented them from learning certain life skills, or just missing life steps. If you've had maybe a very traumatic childhood. So I think for people like that, the spiritual awakening is very important. They have to kind of leapfrog into this. Sometimes I like to think into where everybody else is, to a certain extent. And not to say, I'm not saying, everybody's enlightened or anything, but what I'm just saying is some people that have this, it's not even a matter of being enlightened. It's a matter of really just catching up to where they should be, along with everybody else, because they've missed some major things where they're just not connecting. spiritual awakenings, I do believe, require training and a teacher. So if you, certainly are actively seeking it, get some, find a teacher, do the training. It's absolutely, absolutely important to do the training, if you can. Certainly awakenings can happen if you're seeking it, but, also, they can accidentally happen, like I mentioned earlier, people that have no prior knowledge and these things happen, and it can be very frightening. Certainly with people like that, I just want to let them know, if you do find that you're having some kind of experience, with maybe a spiritual awakening, to seek a teacher, or, at least find resources that can guide you. If you don't have a teacher, or you're not sure where to find a teacher. And I've actually linked a few things I've found in the description. So, look them over. Maybe you find those helpful. It'll explain maybe a lot of things that you're going through and things that you can do. Also, it's absolutely, absolutely important, I think, that to have the guidance, only because some people, if they have a spiritual awakening, they don't fully recover. Some people, just stop the process because they don't understand what's going on, and they do things to make it stop without realizing that they just have to continue pushing through it. And so, of course, they are kind of left with some, deep feelings of emptiness, and, just something was missing. Also, some people, actually, it's so overwhelming that they actually pretty much lose their minds. They're ending up in mental institutions, which is sad. But if you had the guidance, certainly, somebody can, the teacher or your, whoever your guide is could ease you through it and be able to support you during times when it's just insanely overwhelming. Also, people have died. And I wouldn't say necessarily from the actual spiritual awakening, though I'm sure that could be possible. Have a heart attack or something. But also, people, could have just committed suicide because the symptoms were so overwhelming. It was just too much. So that's why, training for a long period of time, and having a teacher, having the resources to understand what's going on is absolutely, absolutely imperative. We always have to remember it's a spiritual practice, and you must be committed to it. There's no, you just do half of it and be like, okay, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. Because once you have your spiritual awakening, it's going to go. Unless you do the, find a way to stop it prematurely, but that's never good. Also, we also, like I said, it's serious business. So, you don't want to go into this thinking, this is just a fun, cool thing to do, or, use it to, get personal gain, like extraordinary spiritual gifts or something. You have to understand, these practices used to be kept secret, and only very, very few people, that were actually prepared to take on a spiritual awakening would do these. So now it's kind of, very scary because like anybody can do it now, which is good. I think we all need to do it, but at the same time, if you don't have the guidance, you don't have the resources, you don't have the teacher, it could be very, very bad. And especially for people that just don't understand what's happening. It's just can be way too much. Certainly one of the things, an awakening does do, it will humble you. It will humble you to your core. Absolutely. Other things that it does, it instills deep unconditional love and compassion for yourself and for others, which is beautiful. Also, it helps with self-acceptance. Just like I said, accepting the darkest parts of yourself. And I mean really accepting it, not just intellectually understanding it, but accepting it, forgiving it, actually feeling it. Also, it's a way to your true self. I like to think of it in the way like the true self. This is just my take on it. Other people may have different ideas, but I also like to think of the true self as how we were as children before the world kind of imposed themselves. And what I mean by that is, for me, when I think of being a child, I would say, up until 5, I was who I was supposed to be. And then after that, you start going to kindergarten, you start getting these rules, and you start learning, how dealing with other people and that sort of thing. So, that's what I think is a way to the true self, is getting back to that part of yourself that you were before the world, impose their things on yourself. Also, it helps too to recognize what is your true self and what is ego. I think that's very, very important. So, having that awareness. We're not always aware of that. So I think that's really good. It helps, also you observe life from kind of a detached perspective. You find that you react less. I'm not going to say you're never going to react, because you're a human being. Sorry. That's going to happen. Somebody's going to push a button and it's just going to happen. But I think you react less and you can kind of step back and be that observer even when things are going on and kind of see it from a much bigger picture. Other things that it does, certainly it takes immense courage to certainly be able to stare at the darkest parts of yourself. Yeah, a lot of courage. Yeah. And then also a conviction of for what's right. What I mean by that is, standing up for things that you now find that you just cannot tolerate anymore. You're just, whatever the world says is okay. You find if you find that, something that's not right, you have no problem now standing in separate from other people and just not tolerating it any longer. So I think, awakening helps with that. Also, it definitely brings you to faith. And what I mean by faith is just a faith of something much, much bigger than yourself. And it helps you to have faith that everything that you're going through in the awakening is for your best benefit. So faith is huge. Also, I think what a spiritual awakening does as well is it's balancing out and maturing parts of yourself, kind of ordering the mind and the body to its optimal benefit. Also learning to live with an open heart. I think we all live with an open heart. Not all of us, I guess. There's times when we close down. But to a certain extent, just living with an open heart, but having wisdom with it, which is very important. Yeah, because I find, when I was younger, I had people tell me, I had the biggest heart in the world. But a lot of my pain was due to the fact that I had no wisdom. So, I think a spiritual awakening actually brings us to that. And what I mean is, living with an open heart, unconditionally loving and giving compassion, even when people, maybe have done you wrong. But the fact that you can, just kind of say, what you're doing is not something I can handle, or, not something I want to engage with, but you as a person, I can still love you as a person regardless of what has happened. So, I mean, I think that's what it means by, living with an open heart, and with wisdom. Listening to your intuition without fear. That's another thing that you certainly can gain. That's always good as well. At least for me, my intuition and my fear for a long time were kind of this one and the same. So, I mean, it kind of helps to listen to it without having that fear, without that self-doubt. Also, trusting your body and your mind to resist less, and just, completely surrender to it. I mean, just completely. Because that's the biggest thing, I think, for us, because I mean we're so into controlling everything sometimes, and to just really realize that you cannot control anything, nothing. I mean, that's huge, and especially when your body and your mind is going through some things that can be very frightening. Sometimes you just have to let it go and just completely surrender to it and just go, all right, fine, we're going on that ride. Also, spiritual awakening can alter who you are, but to the point where you don't even recognize yourself and other people don't either. And that's really scary. So if you're not prepared for that, that could be a bit much. It also completely exhausts your system, and it really does force you to do self-care. If you weren't good at it before, you're going to be excellent at it now, because it absolutely forces you to take care of yourself. Because if you don't, you almost can't function, like, in the world. You absolutely have to do this. Also, people have to understand with the spiritual awakening, it's not just one event. You just don't have a spiritual awakening and there you are and it's over and done with. No, this is a very slow process. You can have different phases, and this is over a long period of time. It can take years, and for some, maybe even a lifetime. So that's why I said it's very, very serious. If you want to go that path, I mean, I wouldn't say anybody don't do it. No, if you want to, great. I mean, go for it, but be aware of what you're walking into. Be aware of everything that this is going to possibly do. It will literally change. I mean, turn your life upside down. So, I mean, the things we have to remember is you have to have an absolutely deep commitment to your spiritual awakening. You have to write it through. You have to have the discipline to certainly, do the practices, the self-care, all of that, and have guidance. You absolutely need guidance. Like I said, either through a teacher or materials, printed resources, just, books, whatever, to certainly assist, make things a little easier, at least to understand what is happening. Also humility. It's absolutely essential to awakening. So, I mean, certainly with this video, people are probably, they're going to scoff. They're going to roll their eyes. They're going to call it crazy, but seriously, until you actually experience it, or it's scientifically proven, I mean, it just cannot be understood. And I just want to make sure people understand, it needs to be taken seriously, and you must know exactly what you're walking into, and be prepared for it, because you never know what your spiritual awakening is going to be. If you're going to be one of the people that you get to ease right into it, or the one that has a complete nightmare. So you just have to be open and willing to go through it all. So that's just my take on spiritual awakening, and my thought processes with it, and the things that happen, and that sort of thing. So I would love to hear from other people, particularly people that have had a spiritual awakening experience. That would be great. But also, I mean, other people that, maybe don't necessarily believe in this kind of path. I'd love to hear from them and their take on things, what they really think a spiritual awakening is, the body processes and all that. So I mean, if you want to like it, and subscribe if you want to hear some more. Again, things I talk about, things that get on my brain. I would love to hear from you. But for now, I will then just say, take care, and I'll just see you in my next video.